a fertility specialist came in, and I was kind of just laying in the hospital bed. I just kind of received some of my ice treatment, and they were like, this, freezing your eggs is just not an option for you. So this treatment, along with the bone marrow transplant, is underway, and there's just not going to be an option for you to have children. It's kind of what I took from it. And so I just kind of just took it as like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to have kids. So that's kind of it.
As we shift into it, Manda, you ended treatment. It was 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was 2010 when you started to feel things again. And this time you said you just knew something was wrong again.
Right. Yeah. I just knew. I just didn't feel right. And I didn't even bother going to like my primary care physician. I just kind of knew. And then I tried to kind of shove a lot of things into a couple of months that I know I really wanted to do. And then I was like, okay, now I'm ready to go tell somebody that this is back. And that's kind of how that started in 2010.
You then do go back in to the process again. You're diagnosed. What was the first diagnosis was Hodgkin 2B, stage 2B. Did they just say, well, this is just relapse refractory, like you relapsed,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because I was like, what stage is it? And they were like, we don't stage. Yeah. We just say it. Yeah. We just
relapsed.
Say it's recurrence. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, or recurrence. And so
yeah.
Then you were told you need to do ICE chemo, and that would be for a few months. But the overall plan was to get a bone marrow transplant done.
Right. Yeah. That was going to be the end game. So they were pretty much adamant about that from the beginning.
Can you describe this whole process? Just sort of summarize what that was like, that whole stage.
Yeah. So ICE chemotherapy, I did a lot of my own research on that, and I kind of realized that it was pretty serious, like pretty intense. And that I would have to, and then they told me, yeah, it's intense. You would have to be in the hospital over 3 days in order to get the treatment. So we did that, and I think, I don't remember how many weeks I had in between, but it took a good chunk of that time to get back into like healthy enough to even think about having the next one. There were a couple of times where we had to postpone, which didn't happen the first time with ABVD, but they had to postpone because like my platelets had tanked, or I needed blood transfusions, and I just wasn't healthy enough to get the next treatment. And so I had never had a blood transfusion before then. And I probably had like, a ton of them. I can't even keep track of how many blood transfusions I had over the span of those ICE treatments. And then just being really, really careful about not getting sick. So I guess during the pandemic, I was just kind of joking around with a friend, and I was like, this was like my life in 2010, always wearing a mask and never going anywhere. So
you're a pro. You were ready for this.
Because you just didn't want to get sick. You wanted your next treatment because you didn't want to postpone it again and again.
Right. No, absolutely. And a lot of the danger, and of course, even after the risk of infection, being very important. And so, and by the way, for the transplant, was it done with the blood cells? Like it was?
Yeah. So it was done with my own. Yeah. So the transplant was autologous. Yeah.
Autologous. It was a stem cell transplant, autologous stem cell transplant. Okay. And so, any last sort of, I know it's a big deal. It's a big, procedure. If you could sum up sort of that experience and any guidance to other people who are about to undergo one.
Yeah. So I think I think one of the things I really took to heart during that time is that one of the PAs who had had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and had worked with a lot of cancer patients came into my room, and he was like, if you lose hope, then you lose everything. Because I was getting really down. And he was like, you just got to come in here and do your time. And that's all. He's like, that's all I'm asking you to, just come in here and do your time. And I was like, it's like prison. And he was like, yeah, like prison. He was like, just come in and do your time, but don't lose hope. And I was like, okay. It was just a really weird experience, because I kind of felt like I basically handed my body over and said, I have no control over this thing anymore. You guys do your thing, get it better, and then hand it back to me when it's done. And I kind of just checked out, like, mentally the whole time I was in my BMT. I just was like, it was almost as if like I was detached from what was going on, because I had no control over it. It was just a really weird experience. But I think my advice would be that you just can't lose hope, and just do your time, because there's like literally nothing else you can do. And I think that was kind of what he was getting across, like, just being here is all you can do right now. So just be here. And I think that's kind of what I took to heart. Just sit here and do my time. There's nothing else I can do.
I I love that you had someone who was able to deliver the message you needed to hear, and that resonated with you. So it's a very involved process, because they're wiping everything clean, and then you do this transplant. Um, but you were in the hospital overall for 22 days.
Mhm.
Um, and then afterwards you had to be very careful, right? Any other sort of guidance to people on how you were able to best get through this time, and not just like physically and physiologically, but mentally and emotionally?
Yeah. So I think I just tried to kind of do a little bit every day. So like I didn't try to make crazy goals for myself, right? So like I would say to myself, okay, you get up and you get a shower today, then that's a win. And I think I was, one day I was like, okay, now you're gonna go for a walk around the neighborhood for 5 minutes, and that's it. And and just kind of tiny little steps, day by day, trying to do something that maybe I didn't do yesterday. And then if I didn't feel like doing any of it, I didn't really get down on myself. I was just like, today's not the day. And tried to kind of start over again the next day. Every day was like a new day, basically, where I had one small goal, and that was it. And I didn't really get down on myself if I didn't achieve that goal, but I tried really hard to see if I could do it.
I love that. Amanda, you're 12 years later, you've been no evidence of disease, right?
Yeah.
How is it thinking about that?
It seems like time has flown by, because it doesn't feel like it was 12 years ago, because some of the things that I think about are still very vivid in my memory, and other things are kind of like really fuzzy. And so it's kind of a weird, like, thinking back on it. It feels like it wasn't that long ago, but also I've forgotten a lot of things as well. And I don't know if that was out of like on purpose, or if like my mind was just like, maybe we should just shove this way far back because you don't want to remember it.
Our minds tend to do things to protect ourselves,
Yeah.
compartmentalize. Well, I so appreciate that. I think, now 12 years later, it's like people can look at you and say, okay, even if there is this situation where there's a recurrence, I have options, and I can do this, and I can survive, and find ways to not just survive, but thrive. And speaking of, we have so many topics out there. And one in particular that I know is very dear to you is, in going through all of this, the cancer diagnoses, two of them for you, the fertility preservation, and talking about family planning, and how you have this very unique vantage point of having been diagnosed at 19 and then again at 27, and how differently you felt maybe at those two different
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
So at high level, what were those big differences, in being diagnosed, and how much in the forefront fertility was in your mind?
Yeah. I think at 19, it just wasn't there at all. I think you spend a lot of your teenage years like thinking, I can't get pregnant, right? Don't get pregnant. And then in your 20s, especially since I was in a committed relationship, I thought, oh, I can see myself being a mom. And so it was pretty much at the forefront for this one for me. And the doctors also had it at the forefront as well. So they actually mentioned it the second time around about fertility and the impacts that my treatment would have on it. So it went from being nothing to kind of something that was talked about quite a bit when I was older.
So as we talk about this, so at 27, at what point did you bring up fertility? Did somebody else?
So the doctors actually, I think, brought it up, but they brought it up in a really weird way because I couldn't quite comprehend it at the time. So I had to start treatment pretty quickly the second time around. And so there wasn't really time to even think about freezing eggs or anything like that. And basically, a fertility specialist came in and I was kind of just laying in the hospital bed. I just kind of received some of my ice treatment. And they were like, freezing your eggs is just not an option for you. So this treatment along with the bone marrow transplant is underway, and there's just not going to be an option for you to have children. It's kind of what I took from it. And then my mom, who was sitting there at the time, kind of was just like, wait, she's not really comprehending this, right? Because I was on medications, and so they definitely had to explain it to me a couple of times. And my BMT doctor kind of also reiterated, like, let's just get you better and we can talk about this later. But, as of right now, there's not going to be too many options for you. And so I just kind of just took it as like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to have kids. So that's kind of it.
I know it took a couple times, especially the first time you're lying in the hospital bed, you're undergoing this very intense chemo regimen, you're not comprehending. And so they explain a few different times what this means. How did you process? I mean, that's a big thing to hear, the messaging of either it's unlikely or it's harder or you may not or whatever in terms of children. Like, what were you feeling and thinking at the time?
Yeah, I don't know. Like it was just kind of like, um, you know, mark this down as another thing that's just not happening. Right. So it was like, okay, I guess grad school's on hold, not happening. Maybe I'm not getting married. Like, why would this guy stay with me? Now I can't have kids. So let's just keep marking things off the list, that aren't going to happen. And so at that point, I was just kind of like, almost just like done. Like, let's just get this over with, like just, just get me better and then I'll deal with it later kind of thing. Because you kind of get a lot of bad news all at once. And so it was a little bit disheartening, I think, but I think the real thing that I was really wanting was just to be done with the treatment. So let's just get this over as fast as possible.
Right. Let's get through this first, then I can deal with all that later. That's, I mean, I imagine they're very difficult, right? Like, yes, you do it because you have to do it. But in terms of like mentally, like, were you able to just sort of push through, or did you think I need to have, some outside help, in talking about this, or designate at least people in my life to talk about this through? Because it seems like it could get pretty tough.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I talked to my parents quite a bit and my siblings. There were a couple of times where I called my dad and I was just crying, like, oh, my hair's falling out and all this is happening. And he would just be like, this is par for the course. Like, why are we crying about this? And I was like, well, and he's like, you just have to kind of keep pushing forward. And I think it just all stemmed from, because he had gone through a lot of stuff that I couldn't even imagine. And so he was just like, sometimes things just don't go your way and you just kind of have to go through it anyway. And just know that like it can be better after it's done, but it's going to be worse before it gets better. And so it was just kind of like, I think there was just people there, like my dad, who were like, you can't get down on yourself too much. Otherwise, like you're just you're not gonna get through this. And so I think that was kind of helpful to have that, um, you know, perspective of somebody who can just kind of be like, you know, pull up your big girl panties and just get it done. Right. Like it's kind of like that's kind of was his mentality. And I think that kind of helped, because otherwise I would just sulk around and do nothing.
I like that you're highlighting this too, because it isn't like a black and white thing.
Yeah.
There is a sort of fine balance. I do think it is important to be able to process if you're not feeling well, to let yourself not feel well,
Yeah.
because it's just what you feel. But then with your dad being a sort of an influence of, okay, now you can move on.
Right.
It's
It was
both.
like, feel bad for yourself, cry, and then you got to get up and move on. And so it was kind of like, okay, fine. I'll feel sorry for myself today and then I'll move on. And so I tried. I mean, I tried like waking up every day and like, okay, like what's like the one good thing I'm going to do today that makes me feel good about myself.
I also appreciate you mentioned this in another context when you said you would give yourself small wins. Like if I can get up, take a shower, that's a win and I'm done for the day. And I like that it's
Right.
okay to do this, but just keep moving this way. So after the transplant's all done, it was nice that at least you said your doctor, the transplant specialist, then said, "Hey, here's an oncofertility specialist." Right? Can you
Right.
describe the conversation?
Yeah. So I think I went in for one of my scans, maybe my third year scan or something like that. And I was like, look, I got married. Um, and I'm thinking about having children and I just need to know my options and I don't know what they are. And he's just like, oh, okay. Let me refer you to a fertility specialist that works with cancer patients. And I was like, that would be wonderful. Like, why do I have to ask for this? Like, like, um, and so then he referred me to her and that kind of got the ball rolling on understanding what my real options were. And if I really wanted to have a kid, then let's make this happen. And this is how it's going to happen.
It'd be nice for that just to be built into the
No,
survivorship part,
yeah,
right?
for real. Yeah. And it's like, it's just, um, it's interesting because it's still kind of very much related to cancer. Like I wouldn't be infertile if I hadn't had cancer, so it's just keeps, keeps coming up over and over again.
So we're going to try to change that part of the conversation. So culturally, these conversations happen as part of the rule, not the exception. So when you go to the oncofertility specialist, aka someone who's a fertility specialist who helps work with cancer patients,
Yeah.
what was the first sort of conversation or first set of conversations like? And maybe if you could describe it also in a way of guidance for other people in terms of useful questions and things to talk about at that stage.
Yeah, I think the first thing we did is kind of she just wanted to see like physically where I was, like from a fertility standpoint. And so she did ultrasounds and she took blood work and she confirmed, what we had suspected. And that was it physically, I probably physiologically, I was going to be able to have a child in the, I don't want to say normal way, but the traditional way. And so she confirmed all of that. And then she took me and my husband and kind of was like going through the different possibilities. And so there was like surrogacy, or there was a couple of other, like maybe adoption, and then, or kind of, there's frozen embryos that you can, that can be donated. And then she was like, and then there's the IVF with an egg donor. And so she kind of laid out all those things. And she was like, I think you would be a perfect candidate for IVF with egg donor. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so then we kind of just talked through like what that process would be and why she thought that that would be a good option for me.
And why was that? It was because you could carry.
Right. So I could carry a pregnancy and then my husband could actually, be the father of the child. And then we could plan it so that we could use multiple embryos from the same donor, and then they would actually be full siblings to each other.
And the way that that phrase that she said to you
Yeah.
when she was telling you, "Here, I've done these tests," and she did
Yeah.
an ultrasound of your uterus, what was it that she said to you?
I think she said it the good news is you have a cute uterus. I was like, oh, okay. Good to know. Didn't know they could be cute. And so, yeah, and so that's um kind of like the silver lining is that, you have things that are still functioning in your body. So let's go ahead, let's use them. And so I thought that was pretty nice. I think it was more of like the good news is you have a good uterus, or like a cute uterus. And the bad news is that I was like fully in menopause. My ovaries were not working. And so like she even showed me a picture and she was like, they're supposed to look like a chocolate chip cookie, I think. And mine didn't look like chocolate chip cookies.
And so I love that she brought a spirit for you too, where in the conversation that she led, you described, she said this can happen for a lot of cancer patients or older people.
Yes.
She brought hope. Can you describe what she said and why it was so important she said it that way?
Yeah. So, I mean, she kind of reiterated, like a lot more people have to use this route than we think. And so, kind of just made it sound more of like it's just a normal way of doing things. Um, and that it's not like super, uh, it's not in the stages of being, you know, like in tests or anything. Like it's being done and people are using it and it's working. So it's gonna work for you. And we have a really high success rate with this. And so she was just really confident and just very hopeful that this was going to be the answer.
She actually also said something else that was really great for you. She said something like, "Oh, we can get you pregnant," right? Can you say again what she had said to you?
Um, yeah, so she was like, um, I think during the like the whole conversation with me and my husband, it was never a moment where she didn't think there was an option, right? She was just like, "We're gonna get you pregnant. You're gonna have a baby. Like this is the way to go." And the confidence that she was just very confident, and I the whole time was like, "Oh, I don't know if this is gonna work or anything," and she was just like, "Yeah, it's gonna work. Like I know what I'm doing." Like, um, so it was just kind of refreshing, I think, to have like someone who was just kind of like, this is done all the time and it's going to happen for you too. And I also had like a little bit of reservations, like, oh, will she be a little bit upset that I'm a cancer survivor and that maybe I shouldn't be having kids? But none of that came up. She was just like, you're fine. You're 5 years out. Your doctor gave you the go ahead. Like we're doing this. So
Can you actually highlight that you had a little bit of a feeling of what was it like? Not guilt or shame. What was that? Of
it
I
was
should
just kind of like, should I bring a child in this world that may have a mom that has cancer for a third time? You know, um, and I just kind of like a part of me was like, maybe I shouldn't have kids because I don't want to put them through that process. Um, but I kind of thought, if I live that way, then I would never do anything. Yeah. And so kind of thought through that a lot more than because there was that kind of point where I was like, I wouldn't want a child to have to see me suffer. Um, but but I kind of quickly understood that I couldn't live my life thinking that it would show up a third time.
And so then you move forward and just sort of wrapping this part of it, Manda, how was that process of choosing? So there were these egg donors, and what was that whole process like with you and your husband?
It was way easier than I ever thought it would be. Um, like they were just really on top of it, like the fertility um doctor was just really on top of it. All of her nurses, they walk you through like the whole process and make it super easy. So they already had like donors kind of lined up that they thought met my expectations. So I wanted someone who was like Caucasian because they wanted them to look like me and my husband. And I wanted someone who had, a fairly good health history. So they test them for a lot of different genetic diseases. Um, and as far as like eye color, hair color, none of that really bothered me. I just kind of wanted to make sure that they were healthy and they kind of looked like me. And that was like my only things. And they were like, "Are you okay with having a first time donor? We may not know if she's going to be able to produce eggs or not." And I was like, "Yeah, that's totally fine too." And so I didn't have too many requirements. And so they had quite a few donors that met the requirements. And then they had a little bit more. So like they tell you the donors can tell you a little bit about their ambition, like their goals in life, what they do now. They tell a little bit about their personality, like what they like to do, if they own pets, that kind of stuff. And then you just and the reason why they're donating is one. And then this particular donor had said she was donating because she had watched her aunt go through a lot of infertility issues. And so she felt like because she was healthy and because she was at an age that she could donate eggs, that she wanted to do that in kind of honor of seeing her family member go through this.
Amazing. And then so you picked your egg donor, and then they did the process of creating the embryo, and then they implanted.
Yep. Yeah. And that process was like lots of shots, lots of hormones, lots of things to kind of make my body do things that I hadn't done in like years because I'd kind of gone through menopause at that point. And so that whole process was just kind of injections and just getting my uterus ready for implantation and then sustaining a baby after it was implanted.
Was there any nervousness, or what were you feeling as this whole thing was happening, the preparation and then the implantation?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of nervousness because I was like, this is happening. And if this doctor's for real, like this is happening. Right. So at this point, I should probably start preparing to be a mom because this is going to happen. And it did. I mean, it was like the first try, the first implantation, it worked.
That's amazing. And then in terms of, I know we're over time. I just a couple more questions. The finances, it just sounds like it can be a thought,
Yes.
right? Of course. How
Yes.
was that?
So I know that they had kind of a financial help, like you could pay over time or you could pay like a set fee for 3 tries or something like that. I had kind of opted out of the 3 try one just because I was like, this is a lot of shots and I don't know if I can do this like, for 3 rounds of IVF. But because I had known that this was going to be the issue, we actually had prepared pretty well financially for being able to fund it. So when we met with the doctor, we kind of knew it was either going to be adoption or something else, right? So we knew that we would have to save up some money for something if we were going to actually do this. And so we were actually pretty prepared because we had been saving for quite some time.
Any guidance to people in terms of, I mean, because this is not covered, or this is all
Right.
out of pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. So the interesting thing is that at the first one, nothing was covered. Since then, I think some insurance companies do actually cover infertility because I think for my daughter, I was able to cover the implantation. So things have changed a little bit, but it wasn't covered. Luckily, I mean, it was a good sum of money, and I kind of joke around with my kids that I need a return on investment for you because like you are expensive.
Yeah, let's get this going. You owe me.
Yeah.
No. um, well, and so I mean, it's beautiful what's happened. You have a son and a daughter. Um, really quickly before we go into just wrapping with talking about them and how beautiful your family has grown to be, there are a lot of people I think who are facing this sort of, oh my gosh, I have to go through cancer treatment. I don't know what my fertility options are. I
Yeah.
may not be able to have children. It's a personal sort of way to work through it. But for you, any sort of just, I don't know if guidance is the right word, but how you were able to go through your process of, okay, here are the different options that I have. It
Yeah.
might not be what I thought it was going to be my whole life, but like moving from point A to point B.
Yeah. Um, it was just like kind of understanding that I got to point B in a really interesting way. And you kind of go, and it was kind of miraculous in some instances, right? So when I think back about all that I went through, and then now that I look at my kids, I'm like, they are truly unique and like never would have existed had my story not existed. And so when I think about that, it's almost as if like I would go back and do it all over again to get the same exact thing, because it kind of made it all worth it at the end. Wasn't the path I thought it would take, but I got what I had hoped for. Um, and so it's like, why would I change that kind of mentality? Like that's what I think about. Um, and so it's just kind of, it's interesting. Before we could do the IVF with an egg donor, we had to go through counseling because it's very important that your children understand where they come from. And they were giving us pointers about like, how do you talk to them about it and stuff like that. And I just always kind of tell them like, you are incredibly special because you came, you know, around in kind of unfavorable like circumstances. Like a lot of things had to happen for you to get here in a weird kind of way. And so that kind of makes you extra special.
I agree. It's beautiful. It's like, it's so beautiful. And seeing the pictures too just made it even more incredible. Even with all of this happening, what is the importance of, as we're looking forward in the future, people are working on being able to try and come up with treatments that will be more favorable to patients, both in terms of people being able to be pregnant and have treatment, and
Yeah.
also being able to be on treatment and have more, maybe options later in terms of the fertility preservation. How
Yeah.
important is that? Because it seems to have been an afterthought, of course, for it saved life first, obviously, but this is an important and a very important area for a lot of people.
Right. I think it's just part of like the cancer journey. It's part of the treatment really. And I don't think people kind of understand that. Right. So it's like it just should be a part of how you treat it. A lot of times it just ends after that last scan and you're on your own, but it just really isn't that way. There's a whole ton of things that I think aren't kind of included in that treatment plan that should be. And I don't really know how to fix it because like I don't know if that's the oncologist issue or what, but it's just kind of like they leave off and then there's just like no guidance after that. Um, or any help or kind of understanding of like what specialist should I have in place for the next 10 years of my life because I've gone to all kinds of specialists since then. So um, just kind of some understanding of what's going to happen next and the things that you need to look out for. Because not every primary care physician is going to know what you need. And you kind of need to know yourself. And so it would be nice to have somebody kind of guide you through like how to advocate for yourself and where you need to go when you have these things happening to you, that kind of stuff.
And as we exit, this conversation and wrap things up, can you describe your kids and how old they are? And
Yeah. So my son, he's 6. He's very, I would say, like empathetic. He kind of understands emotion. So like he can tell when I'm not happy or stuff like that. And he likes to give me a hug when he sees that. Um, and he's very, both of my kids are very independent. they like to do things themselves, and they get upset when they can't do it. So, uh, and then my daughter is just she's just goofy. She does goofy things, and she tries to make everybody laugh. And so they're just really good kids, and just normal kids that I think they're just kind of I think they're just exactly like they should be. I don't know how else to describe them. And then when they get on my nerves, I'm like, you're still my miracle children. Like, I remind myself, you willingly had these children.
I love that. And Manda, thank you. I know you spent so much time with us today sharing your story, and I so appreciate that. So thank you, because I know it'll help so many people out there.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting me do this and for letting me share my story.